Hello and welcome back to the Herbal Entrepreneur Conference. I am Yolanda Joy, and in this session, we are going to be talking about how you can publish your own herbal book. This is such an exciting topic, and I know it is the dream of a lot of herbalists who might be listening today. And for this session, I am so thrilled to introduce Maria Noel Groves of Wintergreen Botanicals. Maria, I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always excited to be back here.
Yes, it truly is a pleasure. You have shared with us on several different topics over the years at the Herbal Entrepreneur Conference. And I think today's topic is a wonderful one for you to cover with us because, first of all, one of your very first book was one of the core books that grew my interest in herbalism right in the beginning phase of my journey. This was Body into Balance. And then you've since then written two more books about growing herbal remedies and another one that is just about to come out next month. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey as an author?
Yes, I'd be more than happy to. And I'm so honored to hear that the first book was meaningful for you in that way. So far I have two books in print. However, when this airs, my third book will be just about to release and ready for pre-order. And that is going to be Herbal Remedies for Sleep. And my first book was Body into Balance. My second book, actually, wrong way. My first book was Body into Balance. My second book was Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. And there may even be an additional book in the works by the time this airs that would release the following year. We'll see. I came into my professional world as a journalist. So I was getting my degree in journalism and English. And it was while I was in college that I really started to work with herbs personally. I had a very traumatic experience, and that brought up some sleep issues and some panic attack issues. And I've been always kind of interested about these cool, like magical things that plants could do to heal our bodies, but I didn't really have any education or training or books or anything like that on it. And so I walked into my local herb shop, they hooked me up, and then I started to really dive into herbs a lot more. And so as I left college, on a personal level, I started studying a lot more with herbalism, but then on a professional level, I started to get more books and do almost all of my journalism writing on herbalism, and ended up working for Natural Health Magazine for a number of years as the person running the research department, fact-checking department, and covering the herb beat. And then I left that to study to be an herbalist. And so that's when my career, quote unquote, as an herbalist began. But I've always loved writing. That was something I discovered in high school, and starting in college while I was going through those journalism classes, I started writing about plants and plant medicine and health. And that certainly just kept going as time went on. And, I remember having one of my neighborhood parents say to me at one point, like, "Oh, when's your book going to come out?" And I was like, "I'm not going to write a book. Like, I don't have enough to say to write a book." And then as time went on, I realized I do have something to say in a book. And I had been teaching for a number of years in my professional world, professional life as an herbalist, my Home Herbalist series, and then my Beyond the Home Herbalist series, which is organized a lot like many of the herb schools throughout the country are, including like Rosemary Gladstars and others, where we go through different body systems and different remedies with each class. And even though it was a very popular way to learn herbal medicine at the time, there really weren't books that were organized that way. And so I had this aha moment where I realized I do have a book I could write. I could basically turn these class materials into a book, and how wonderful would it be? It would be so much more affordable. We could have it beautifully designed. Like my notes are just black and white on, mostly text on a page, but we could have photography, and I really wanted it to be visual. And it just, once I started thinking about it, I got more and more excited. And we'll get into it a little bit more about like the process of finding a publisher and reaching out to a publisher. But I ultimately did reach out to Story Publishing. They were my first choice as a publishing company after kind of chatting with different people I knew who had written books in different kinds of ways. And it took a while. Like, they weren't quite ready for a big book. They definitely wanted to have more books because Rosemary's Beginner Guide had come out and was doing really, really well. And this was, kind of in the early teens, if you will, of the 2000s. And there had been a huge glut of herb books that came out when I was in the magazine world, right around the year 2000. A ton of great herb books came out, but then it was pretty quiet and only a handful of books were coming out here and there. So they were ready to start publishing more herb books. The few that they had done recently were doing really, really well. But they weren't totally sure if they wanted to do kind of a bigger book. Story sometimes likes some of those lighter and more visual books. And after a lot of like back and forth and checking in and all that, they ultimately decided to go for it. And it's been a wonderful journey. It was a little bit of a sleeper at first, but through them and word of mouth and some of the marketing that I did, and just really wonderful response within the community, it has continued to grow and grow. And it's been a really beautiful experience and has also certainly been a benefit to the other aspects of my business as well. So that's sort of the long, short version of my journey into publishing. And after that first book, I did, then the publishers actually started approaching me for additional books. So the second book and the third book were their idea. And then I'll know more by the time this airs, but I've got a fourth potential book that's my idea that is in progress right now of approvals. So that's sort of how the process has gone for me.
It's so encouraging as an herbalist who hasn't actually written a book yet to hear that you didn't feel like you had that book idea inside you at the beginning, but then it took you several years or some time to think, oh, actually, I do have unique expertise and I could write a book, and actually getting it out there. It's nice to know, because I think I'm in that position where it would be a lovely thing to do one day, but I'm not quite sure yet. Like, what's that? Like, how would it look? What would it be? But sometimes it just takes a little bit of time for that idea to form, and that it can come, even if you don't feel like it just yet, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
So perhaps now we could get into the process and the thoughts and tips that you have shared for this session. Would you like to get into it?
Yes. One of the things I know we really wanted to mention were just like a variety of different questions. And so you had a couple questions for me initially, and so I've sort of expanded them. And so we'll kind of dive into your first question here.
My first question is about deciding on the topic. So what we just talked about now, we feel like we have some sort of vague idea of what to write about or what interests we have, but like, how do we actually decide what book to write, what people are going to be interested in reading, and what makes sense to write about? Like, how do you as an author make that decision and make the right decision?
Yeah, it's, there are so many different things that come into play, and I'm far from an expert. I'm really just sharing my own experience as somebody who's been going through the process a couple times, and also some conversations with fellow herbalists who are authors, both at Story and also through various other, some of them are self-published, some of them have published with different publishers. And also just as somebody who's been paying attention to the herbal book world for a couple decades now, back in the earlier days in my year around like 2000 was when I was working at the magazine, and 2000 through 2002 or so. And it was when all these books were coming out. So I had the advantage of getting review copies of almost all of them. And in some cases, I even reviewed some of the books. So I reviewed Nancy Phillips's book. I reviewed one of Rosemary's books, which was part of my introduction to the herbal world, but also gave me, from a little bit of an outsider, but a little bit of a view of what's trending in the herbal book world. And so when you're thinking about like, should you even write a book? Like, is that something that works for you? Is that something that you have in yourself to offer the community? It's not just should you write a book for your own personal self, but it's also should you write a book just in the grand scheme of things? Is that your skill and your gift to the world? And then if the answer is yes, like what should you write about? There are so many options out there. And while there's certainly a place for general herbals, nowadays, we have a lot of general herbals, and I've really seen the beauty of seeing a variety of more niche and new topics come out. And I think that the world is ready for a lot of new topics and different representation of the writers as well, so that we have vastly more representation coming out and being published right now, which is very, very exciting. So one of the things that you might want to first start with is like, should and can you write a book? Like, is for yourself, Is that something you personally have the interest and drive to do? Do you have the time and space in your life? Is that something that you're passionate about doing? Because it is like birthing a baby. I guess. I don't know. I've never birthed a baby, but like it's a big process and it consumes a bit of time. And in some ways, you may or may not be getting directly paid for that time, especially initially. It's not always a profitable thing to write a book. So, is that something that is important for you? Do you have like that drive? And do you have the skill to write? Or if you feel like you have something very important to say and that would be really useful to our communities, but maybe writing isn't totally your skill, maybe you would work with a publisher that will support you with that, or maybe a co-writer or something along those lines. Like, for example, David Winston has written some fabulous books that are definitely among my favorites. And he is very vocal about having struggled throughout his whole life with dyslexia. And so I strongly suspect that that's part of the reason why he always has a co-author. And so he hasn't let that learning disability impede his ability to really put forth the amazing information that he knows and has learned and has come up with the community at large. So if there's a block, but the important, the book or your passion for it is big enough, there are often ways to work around that if you're willing. But at the same time, having some skill for writing or having somebody who can support you with that writing will be really helpful so that your book is successful. Where is your skill set to share? What do you do or know that you do or know well that you have the capacity to share with the community that your community would really benefit from? And I was listening to a lecture recently by somebody on how to market a book and how to write like a must-read book. And that was one of the things that they said. It's not just about you when you're writing a book. I really love this about what she was saying. She's like, it's not just about you in writing your book. It's actually really about your community, your audience, and what is really going to serve them. How would it benefit them? And so be thinking about that, like what's unique or what's not currently available that's within your skill set and within your passion to share that would really benefit others. And that might be a broad audience. And certainly from an economical standpoint, having a broad audience is nice. Lots of people potentially buying your books. But there's also a great value these days, I think, in niche audience as well. And we are also in a time period of herbal books where even if you have a niche, that doesn't mean that other folks outside that niche wouldn't necessarily be interested. So for example, I'm a cis woman, I'm a white woman predominantly, and I am loving that there are books in the works on trans and non-binary herbalism, that there are books coming out on herbalism from African American perspectives and from Latinx perspectives. And that is really exciting for me, even though I will never be an expert in those things. I don't want to be, I couldn't be. It's not my community per se, but I love learning from different perspectives. And so I think we are in a little bit of a unique space where we are gaining greater understanding and appreciation for different topics as well as different viewpoints. And so that can be a very exciting time in herb book publishing as well. But it's not just about that. There may be some other thing that you know about or a way in which you're talking about herbalism that's a little bit more unique. That was one of the benefits of Body into Balance. It wasn't that it was a super unique concept. It wasn't like anything I said in that book was earth-shattering or new, but it was organized in a way that really didn't exist much, at least in the herb books at that time. It was organized by body system. It was very easy to read and understand, and went through kind of like a mixed level of slightly in depth, but not quite at the textbook level. It was still something that was written in everyday layperson's language. And so that ended up working out really well. And so what's unique, what do you share? What do you have to share that isn't already out there that would be of benefit? And then the other things to be thinking about is like, do you have the time to write a book? Do you have the time to sit down? How long does it take really depends on you and your process, on the book and how expansive it is, and also on your publishing company and or how you're publishing. You may or may not be working with a publishing company, but some places will give you a year to write or many years to write, and other places are like, that's great, like give it to us in a month or a couple of weeks. And so what fits your topic and what fits your time frame? Do you have that space to carve out? For me personally, my best writing times are in winter, when my class season is a little quieter, when I don't have as many garden, I'm in New Hampshire, so we have like long, cold, dark winters, which I love the opportunity for that time of year to do things like studying and writing and thinking and putting together plans that I don't really have as much time to do in the key growing seasons. And, can you market it? And this is an interesting perspective that I don't know if it was as important when I first started going out with my first book. I've definitely seen it become more important with the increase of social media and Instagram and influencers and all of that. It's fascinating. My life, I feel like, is still young in a lot of ways, but I've still seen quite a shift in a lot of things, including the world of publishing, just in, say, the last 5 to 10 years or so, and then certainly in the last few decades. And so one of the things that I see publishing companies being increasingly interested in is who that author is beyond what they can write, and that they can write it and that people want to read it. But what is their platform? Do they have the capacity to market it? Because, you will have the advantage of the publishing company. Hopefully they'll be able to help market your book. But a lot of the most meaningful marketing comes from the author themselves and their reach to kind of help build that initial buzz to catapult the book out in the world. And I've been talking to different people. I'm very excited that we're doing this topic because people keep asking me, like, how do you write a book? I'm thinking about writing a book. Like, do you have any tips? And so we had like little meetings and things that were really helpful. But I love that this will reach a lot of people and be able to support them and their thoughts. And so one of the things that I read, as the editor that I work with is working with somebody else that I know, and she was concerned, like, I'm writing my proposal. I don't necessarily have a big audience. I have a little audience. I've been building it, but it's not, thousands and thousands of people. And the author or the editor had said, well, that might not be a problem as long as you have connections to other people or can create those connections to other people. And this particular author does have connections with, say, like the Herbal Academy and with me and with other folks who might be willing to, when that book launches, give it a little bit of a endorsement and a push to help increase that awareness. And I definitely see that with a lot of other books that have come out in recent years, say like Kimberly Gallagher's beautiful book on aphrodisiacs, or Cammie McBride had a great book when she did a reboot of her Herbal Kitchen book, and really like that very active reaching out to the herbal community to see if they would be willing to help market and promote and share the love for the book. And that can be really, really helpful, but it's not absolutely necessary. When I started out, I did have a local, I did have a little bit of a local following. I had been teaching and writing about herbs in my local communities for years, and also had done some national magazine writing. But for the most part, like, not that many people outside of New Hampshire really knew about me. And I worked really hard to market and support the book to a broader audience, and it really did help. And then, of course, the publishing company helped as well. And so the two of us working together made a little bit of a dream team to help ensure that not only did we put this book out into the void, but that it came with a momentum that helped carry it out there and then continued to carry it out there over the years. And so that's a big piece. It's not just about writing the book and saying it's done. It's about the drive to continue to support that book once it's out there. And if you're proud of the book and you really feel like you've done a nice job with it, it shouldn't be too hard to do that. Another piece that I wanted to throw in here, because I think people ask about it a lot, and I think we as herbalists should be willing to talk about it and willing to discuss these details with one another so that we can support everyone in being able to make a living as an herbalist. Herbalism is in many ways a calling, and writing books, just like seeing clients, is not necessarily a majorly profitable. It can be a lot of work for not that much monetary return. But the more that we think about it and talk about it, the more that we can honor our education and our time and our sharing, and be able to at least, be able to have a comfortable living, which for many of us who do this for a living is important. And so keeping in mind that writing the book is more than just the time to write a book. It's also the editing, the layout, the marketing, the selling of it. There's a lot that goes into all aspects of supporting the book. It can be extremely time consuming. And most writers are paid in royalties. It does depend, if you are self-publishing, then you will make, and we'll get more to like self-publishing versus publisher in a little bit. But if you're self-publishing, you'll make off the profits of the book. And if you are working with a publisher, usually you'll get some amount of a royalties percentage. And that percent might be surprisingly small. I will share that I make like less than $1 per book sold on my books. It's a very small percent. And it's not just because they're, quote unquote, greedy publishers. I really love story. And so I don't consider them greedy. I know that a lot of the other money is going towards the photographer, the design, the distribution. There are so many different things that can go into having a successful book. But nonetheless, the royalties can be pretty small. This time, I have yet to get anything beyond my advance for my second book. I look forward, maybe by the time this airs, I'll finally have, made some additional money off of since the advance, whereas Body into Balance has done pretty well. And so these royalties and also the advance and the advanced schedule of payments will really vary widely based off of the book, the publishing company. It's very different from publishing company to publishing company. And then also your contract. Like you may be able to bargain for a little bit more. Exactly how they calculate those percentages and what those percentages are will vary. And so just kind of being aware and talking to different publishing companies, talking to different authors from different publishing companies can be very helpful. And some publishing companies, there's some room for shift, but usually not huge jumps in shift. Like you might be able to bargain for like a percentage more, or like, okay, once I sell 10,000 copies, can my percentage go up a little bit more on my royalties? The advance is, if you get an advance, usually what that is an estimated amount of royalties that you might make in, say, the first year of publishing, or it could be a different amount, but it comes out of your royalties, but it's paid before those royalties actually come. And so it depends on the publishing company, but you might get it in like one lump sum when you sign your contract, or when you submit your manuscript, and or like once the manuscript is mostly ready for publishing. So for me, that's usually been a chunk of it after the contract gets signed, maybe a chunk of it after the manuscript is published, and then the rest of it usually like around or after you've done pretty much all of your obligations in terms of editing, photography, layout, all of that. And then once the royalties actually start to accrue, it'll wait until you've kind of met that amount, and then your royalties go after that. That's with a publishing company. And if you're self-publishing, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And depending upon whether you actually literally print books, that's a lot more expense up front. But a lot of people really like printed books versus like a print on demand ebook kind of style, which is less for you on the upfront. And definitely when people self-publish, they make a lot more of a percent per book versus when people are working with publishing companies. But I've talked to different herbalists. Some herbalists get zero royalties. Some, I've talked to folks in the academic world, they actually have to pay to get their books published, which is ridiculous in my mind. So I would make sure that whoever you work with is going to pay you, whether it's immediately or later or a mix of both. You should get paid to write your book.
So if you are like reaching out to people when you are having that conversation, what sort of points can you negotiate on? What can you use to your advantage when you're negotiating the particulars of a contract?
Yeah, I only know little bits and pieces, but I will say that, you can, I would before you like start to officially sign in with a contractor or with a publisher, if you're going to do that, find out a little bit about what they do and don't offer, and talk to a couple different, like either talk to the publishing companies or talk to people who have published with those publishing companies to get a vibe for where things are at with that. But you might be able to bargain for, I would always bargain a little high and see what happens. The worst that happens is they say no, and maybe you'll haggle down to a lesser amount, but maybe it's still more than they would have automatically given you. I didn't haggle at all on my first contract. I was just so excited to get a book contract that I had really, it was really me who was pushing that book into the world to be happening. And like later I thought, I should have probably at least bargained for like a percentage point more versus just taking it where it was. Some publishing companies might have more room for flexibility, whereas others don't. But yeah, and then the other idea of like, once you reach a certain percentage, number of books sold, can your percentage go up would be something worth. I found that was something that I was better able to get some support with versus like going for an astronomical percent was just not going to happen, at least not with my publishing company. Whether you get the money more in advance versus more in your royalties later is also completely up for debate. I know from talking with one of the editors that I work very closely with at Story, who also advises other people publishing books out, not just at Story, but elsewhere. And she mentioned that when folks work with an agent, oftentimes the agent will really work to get a big chunk in the advance. It ultimately doesn't necessarily end up being that much more or less versus as time goes royalties. But for an agent whom you're sharing your royalties with, they like a big lump sum because it's just much easier like finances for them to get paid and move on to the next project. And there could be a bonus for you as well, so that like, all right, maybe the book doesn't sell as well as you expected to, but at least you got that advance. And so there can be some perks there. Or maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe it'll be nice to be getting these like little checks as time goes on. And maybe over time they grow up to be slightly bigger checks. If your book continues to really do well and be out there in the communities, maybe that's really nice to get like little infusions of money throughout time. So it depends on what works best for you and also what that particular publishing company's style might be. Some publishing companies will have you provide the photography and the artwork, which might be an additional bargaining chip. If you're providing that, you could say, hey, I'm also providing this, so you don't have to pay that person, especially if you have the skill to be able to provide those aspects.
And when you were talking about the advances and the royalties over time as well, I'm just curious, in your experience, do the royalties over time tend to get bigger, or do they kind of decline over time? Obviously, this depends on the book and the popularity of the book and things like that. But how has that been for you in your experience in your own books and other authors that you know?
Yeah, I think it really depends on you and your book as well as the publishing company. So, it can, if it's continuing to get out in the world, like for example, for Body Into Balance, which was sort of a sleeper to start, like, the title initially isn't something that people immediately know what it's about. And then also nobody, outside of New Hampshire really knew who I was initially. So it was a little bit of a sleeper, but then I've been really honored that a lot of different herb schools have taken it on, and not even just herb schools, but nutrition programs and whatnot have taken it on as a textbook. And so that has really continued to like maintain and boost sales. And just the response has been really, really lovely, which I'm so absolutely honored by. And so for that, I have seen it like kind of mostly grow. I mean, there are also dips and, there are dips and spikes, like with the pandemic. Initially, like everybody was buying books because they wanted to be more self-sufficient and also didn't have a whole lot to do during shutdowns. So books jumped up in sales, but then after things opened up, book sales really dropped off dramatically because people didn't have time to write books, and any of the bookstores that had refilled their shelves had a bunch of books already there. And so they didn't need to refill their shelves again for a while. So there are definitely like ups and downs, but it has the potential to keep going, or at least provide a little bit of income if there's still momentum that's continuing behind the book. And that will also be helped if your book remains in print. That's one of the downsides to some publishing companies that I've seen, and also potentially to self-publishing, is that you may need to like reprint the book. Like I have some books that I've absolutely loved and wanted to like buy and resell to my community. And they were only out for a couple months, and I went to go buy more, and it's like, oh, it's out of print now. Like out of print, like it just came out. And so maybe it came back in print again, but there are these like fits and stops and starts and that kind of thing. I was just listening to a lecture of somebody else that they were super disappointed that they're on a conference circuit. And at the same time that they're on a conference circuit, their publishing company ran out of their book and won't have any ready for a while. And like, that's a huge loss of momentum. And so that's something to be thinking about yourself, as well as be asking your publisher is like, how long is this going to be in print? If you run out of the first run, like how quickly does the next run go out? You know, just kind of, that's something that will support the momentum of the book, is if once people realize it exists, that they're still able to get it, and making sure that it's readily available with very few dips in its availability. So that's something that will also affect the longevity and your royalties over time that people might not realize. And yeah, but then also sometimes a book goes out there in the world, there's a little bit of a flurry, and then if you know, in the glut, this is one of the downsides of right now, is that there are so many herb books coming out that if your book isn't really like hitting a particular audience really well, it may just kind of gradually dwindle and just kind of like fade off into the sunset. And that might be okay, or it might not be okay, depending upon what your goals for the book and what the capacity for the book is. And I also want to note that like having a book is not just about making money. It can also be about really serving the community. I think that should always be the biggest driver of like something that is actually going to support people and their well-being, and also just like the mission. And then some people also see it as their legacy. You know, I know elder herbalists who are working really hard to try to make sure that as much of their unique wisdom is available in print, so that even when they pass on, those lessons that they have learned and have shared are still accessible for the generations to come. And so all of these different factors come into sort of like the how and the why and the meaning of the book, beyond just like making money. That's really just one very small piece that may or may not even really happen, but hopefully you'll at least make some money for the amount of work that you've put into the book. And maybe you'll do really well. And you may even see too, if the book is successful, that boosts other aspects of your business, that more people come to take your classes or become clients or whatever other aspects of your business there are beyond writing, that there may be a boost because of that increased visibility, or because you have a book, maybe it's easier to get a conference gig, and then that conference gig enhances your visibility as well as book sales. And you know, just all of those little things can network together, especially if you have the energy and the organization to kind of tie all those things together.
Absolutely. I can see how helpful the credibility of having a book is to really boost your visibility with the wider world, especially for like clinical herbalists or people who teach classes, or even product makers, like really across the board. It just lets people know about what you do, and that lifts the credibility of your skill set, I think. And that is a huge benefit that probably has a big value down the line as well, in addition to like actual book sales, as far as that goes.
It's also kind of like silly in some ways, because there are so many really amazing herbalists that we know and love and who have contributed so much to our communities and our education that don't have books as well. So it's not like somebody has to have a book in order to be legit, or that having a book necessarily makes you like legit and have something, helpful for people. But it is kind of like one more, for better or for worse, it is like one more little notch in the cap of visibility and clout, if you will. So, whether that's right or wrong is hard to say, but it can be one of those things.
It's definitely a way to reach more people in any case. Like some people like to sit down with the book, and like that is a way to get your message, your vision out to more people. So to support the community, as you've got written on the slide, it's another way to reach people. So like perhaps now we could move on to the process of actually writing the book. So the approach and how to, make your idea into a concrete book that comes into someone else's hands. So like, how do you go about writing a book?
I think I've actually hinted on some of this already, but the process is going to be really unique to like each person, each book, each publishing company. So I'm just coming at this from predominantly my experience and perspective, and a little bit from also talking with other people, but mostly from my own. So don't feel like just because I'm saying this is the way it happens or happens for me means that your process will be the same. It could be very different. But one of the first things that I would often do is just be like, if you're starting from scratch, nobody's come to you, because people do sometimes get approached by publishing companies and say, hey, I've seen you out there. We'd like to do a book. We think you could do it. Do you want to write this book? So, like, that definitely happens. But, and then you can decide whether or not you want to write that book and whether or not that publishing company is the place that you want to write it. But assuming that it's you who's sort of originating this and that you're thinking, I think I want to write a book, and how am I going to go about doing this? You could be first, probably thinking about, what do you want to write? Like, as we mentioned before, like, what's the topic that is really passionate for you, that there's that community need for, and all of the things that we just said. As you are simultaneously coming about that, also start to create, as you distill it down, come up with like a clear mission for the book. No one book is going to be everything to everybody. So what's that 2-sentence or 1-paragraph way to explain what that book is? What's the elevator pitch? What's the mission? What's the goal? That will be really, really helpful for you as you continue to flesh out your book and what's included in it and what's not included in it, who your audience is, as well as figure out how best to publish it and who your audience is for that book. So there are a lot of things that will come out of that clear mission of what you want to do. And if you do want to work with a publishing company, they will be far more receptive if you have a clear concept for the book, and especially if that concept is something that fits that publishing company. Be thinking about who is your audience. And as you continue to flesh out other aspects of the book, you're going to want to be thinking about, like, how do we best make this book approachable for that audience? What is the style of writing that they like? Do they want annotated studies or not? What kinds of titles do you want for your chapter headers that are going to appeal to that audience? What is the look of the book going to be? Maybe it's not really you who figures that out. Maybe that's the publishing company, but it's kind of part of the overall vision. Is it important to have graphics or charts or other things like that? Or is that not important for the book? Where is that book going to be sold that will reach your audience? Where and how is that book going to be sold that will reach the people for whom your book is most meant for? So those are all things that are going to go into the overall like outline and ultimate writing and design of the book, as well as figuring out how best to get the book into those people's hands. So like publishing companies, self-publishing, how you're self-publishing, all those things. Figure out what your vision is, like what's your brand, what's your vibe, all that, what's the price point? For me personally, one of the reasons why I chose to work with a publishing company and chose to work with Story is that while I did want to have like lots of information and text, a lot of people know me as sort of like an oversharing and slightly OCD organized person. And so I wanted to have that, but I also really wanted it to be beautiful. I love seeing pictures of the plants. I wanted people, as they were flipping through the book, to be able to really feel like they were like almost with the plants and connecting with the plants on a variety of sensory levels. And so it was very important for me to find a publishing company that would be able to create that through photography, through design, through all of that, versus having, more of a black and white print text kind of book, which can also be wonderful, but I knew was not what I personally wanted from a book. And so one of the things that I did when I was in my early phases of trying to think about what did I want and who did I want to partner with to do that, was I looked at my bookshelf and I looked to see who was writing the kinds of herb books that I wanted my herb book to be and what the price point was going to be. Because I knew from buying and reselling for various stores. I worked in natural food stores, and I also have bought and resold or books for people. I know that when you work with certain smaller publishing companies and textbook publishing companies and self-publishing, that sometimes the price point is tricky. Sometimes the book is really expensive, which might mean more money in my pocket as the author per book, but it might also mean that it doesn't reach as many people. Or how much of a discount does somebody get if they're buying it wholesale to resell, like a bookstore or an herb shop? And if you're working with some of the smaller press or self-publishing or the academic, the wholesale rate tends to not be a very good percent off, which might make your book less accessible. If you're not available at the distribution places that are tending to be where the resellers shop from, then it may be harder for your book to be in as many places. And that may not matter. If you have a great way to market your book in other ways, like through your website or whatever, those kinds of things might not be a hindrance. But for me, it was really important that, I know that a lot of the really fabulous herb books are really hard to get and are not commonly sold. And I wanted a book that was easy and economical and beautiful, and have the ability to be widely distributed. And so that was one of the things, in addition to like, who would be able to help me create the vision of the book that I wanted, that factored into my decisions when figuring out who I wanted. And I wanted a publishing company that would help me with polishing the language and making it really beautiful, whereas somebody else who maybe has graphic design skills, or the topic just that's not important to the topic, those things might not matter. And so more money might actually end up in your pocket per book if you're not looking for those things. Whereas other publishing companies that are fantastic that I considered, they were on my second tier, but I knew that I would have to provide most of the photography. And I have pictures, but like, I'm not a professional photographer. I wanted to partner. So there are just all sorts of different things that come into that. What books, the other thing you want to be thinking about, and if you do work with a publishing company, they want to know this, but even if you don't, this is important to keep in mind. What books already exist that are similar, if any, and how is your book different? And this can be tricky because there are so many herb books coming out that maybe when you first start to launch your book, there aren't any books like it, but then halfway through your process, another book comes out that is very similar. And that happens. That certainly has happened to me in both of the book, actually all three of the books. But try to be thinking about like what's kind of special about your book, and making sure that it's not just a Me Too book that's like other things that are already out there. Talk to people, get ideas, bounce off feedback. I took out a lot of my fellow authors out to lunch or dinner so that I could ask them questions, and also just had general conversations. If you have an audience already, you could like put it out on social media. They're like, hey, I'm thinking about a book. What do you want to hear? Or put out a survey, or, how much you want to give away initially is totally up to you. You don't want somebody else to scoop you. But it can be a great way to just get that feedback that might end up being really, really helpful to craft the book, and craft a book that does matter to other people. And as you start to get ready to actually do the writing, I would suggest, first starting off with that like blurb or that mission, what's on the back of the book, how are we going to, what's that driving theme and vibe of the book. Then start to create a basic outline. And maybe once you get the basic outline, you can start be thinking about like, what are my chapter titles? What are my section headers? What are the little like extra boxes or recipes or little other features that are going to be part of that book? So you can start to kind of get a vibe of that skeleton that gradually gets those extra layers of meaning and gets closer to the book that you want. You might want to write a sample chapter, like the introduction and maybe an other chapter of the book. One of the interesting things about nonfiction is that you don't usually write, if you're going to be working with a publisher, you don't usually write the whole book from start to finish and then market it. You actually write a book proposal and then send them your book proposal, which is basically those features that I just mentioned, plus a few other things. And then they look at it, they assess it, and they decide whether they're going to approve it or not. And they, may converse with you, or they may decide, okay, this is what we want this to change, or this is good, or this is how many pages it's going to be, or this is how many words it's going to be, and this is the size of the book and all that. And then once you get that approval and maybe a little bit of conversation back and forth on the details, then you actually write the book. So it's not that you need the book already written. And in fact, publishing companies usually don't want you to have the book already written. They want to be able to see the framework of that book and then go from there. And so that can be helpful. And then once you're writing, I would strongly recommend setting aside time to write. That could be a chunk of time. It's really hard to write a book when you're trying to do the rest of life. The rest of life almost always ends up taking priority, and then the book like doesn't get written. It's just very, and it, for me at least, and I think for a lot of folks, you really kind of need like that time to really focus and get into the gist of writing the book. And just trying to do little bits and pieces throughout the day just isn't super successful. I personally keep like a little note on my phone and my computer that's shared that I could just throw down ideas, or, oh yeah, that recipe, or, oh yeah, that section title, or, as I'm just pondering it. But once it comes time to write it, set aside like a month, a few months, go on retreat, set aside like a week throughout the, each month, maybe a week. If you're going to be writing the book over a longer period of time, like block off a week where you don't have any appointments and you don't have anything. I know many authors like Kat Meyer just did a wonderful book on herbal energetics. And so she went on retreat to like the ocean, I think, and just like found a Airbnb or a place to stay so that she could just really focus on her book without any other things on her mind. I think I've heard that Rich Ochek also goes to the ocean and does his writing there as well. For me, I didn't get to go on retreat, but I did set it aside. My winters tend to be my best time, but I really got to like buckle down. And for me, it's about trying to schedule those days, and especially those weeks where there's basically nothing else going on, and then put my phone in do not disturb mode, have my email closed so I'm not seeing those emails coming in, like just really focus for the large part of the day. I do personally, I need that break time because it gets overwhelming after a bit. And it's a very different kind of work than the rest of work I do. For me, what is really important, especially in the wintertime, to like stop partway through the day, go for a walk in the woods, get a chance to like disengage a little bit while still letting all those thoughts go through my head, and then come back refreshed for the second part of the day. Then you'll submit your manuscript. So, once you've got your approvals and all that, and you've written your book, you'll submit it. Typically, there are various rounds of editing. The timeline varies widely depending upon the person and the process. When I've gone to Mother Earth News Fair conferences and chatted with the other authors from other publishing companies, it's been really interesting to see, like, some of them didn't like the idea of working with Story because they don't want to wait like 2 years for a book to come out. At Story, it's often, not always, but often it's like a year to write it and then a year for editing and design process. And they're like, no, I want my book out there now. And so they've either self-published or worked with other publishers who get it done really quickly. And there are pros and cons to all of that, but there are often going to be various rounds of like going through content editing, design, layout, then we edit it some more. And then ultimately like a few final copy edits, and then it goes off to the printers, and then it releases. And then, you want to be hopefully building, leading up to the release of the book, building interest in it, taking pre-orders or encouraging pre-orders, marketing it, selling it, supporting it, however you're going to support it before, during, and after the pub date. For me, I'd say that each book was about at least a 3-year intensive process where that was a major part of my day-to-day business. Not the only thing I was doing, but a major part in order to go through those different phases. So very time consuming for me, at least. But for other people, they whip them out really quickly and get the books out there. So it can be different for different people.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I didn't totally realize it would take quite that long to work with a publisher. Like, I kind of had in my mind that it would be, I don't know, probably half what you said, 6 months of writing and 6 months of editing, and within a year have it out. But to really be realistic about that timing and realizing that it can take years from that initial idea, it's kind of like, okay, I have a little seed of an idea. Maybe I should just do that initial chapter outline and the draft that you said at the beginning and send that off to a publisher just to see what the process is like. Like, even if I haven't written the book yet, you can see the response before you're ready, because the process takes so long.
And it totally varies based on the person as well, and the publishing company. So sometimes books are like done in a couple months or within a year. It really just, and even at Story, like sometimes they fast track things and it's done in, maybe an author just has a few weeks to write it and then it's done in like a year. But there are other places where it's less. And I know other folks, for example, Krista Sinadinos, recently published a fantastic like monolith of a book with like amazing materia medicas, and hers is self-published. And I think it took her close to a decade between like the writing, the photography, the layout, like so well done. And it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. And that took her a long time to produce. It definitely was a labor of love. And now it's in the world. And I know my students like adore the book.
Yeah, it's about giving it the time that it needs. It's not always the same, and that makes a lot of sense, I think. The next kind of step onto here is like finding the publisher to work with, or making that decision as to self-publishing or work with a publisher, which I think we'll get to after this. Would you like to walk us through the process of what it is like to find a traditional book publisher and what it looks like?
Sure. And I think I actually, inadvertently already went through a lot of this already. First, you figure out your book, you do your market research, you look at like who the publishing companies are out there that you might want to work with, and sort of pick the ones that you think are the best option for you. And you can submit to more than one publishing company at a time, but often they prefer if like you kind of focus on one at a time. So it's up to you which way you do that. Just know that the publishing companies usually prefer. But I will say that for me, one of the things that I think ended up being kind of helpful in my check-ins, because like I said, Story initially was not had mixed feelings about doing the book that became Body into Balance. And so I wouldn't hear from them for a while. And then I would check in periodically and be like, so like, just curious, like if you're not interested, I totally understand, but I do have some other publishing companies that I'd like to pitch it to if you're not interested, because, I really want to see this book in print. And then that ended up being like, oh, your book, because usually they're like, they've got a bunch of things on their plate that they're trying to juggle. So if your book wasn't like an immediate yes for them, it might kind of shuffle down to the background. And so that may have helped me in the process, even though it took them like a year and a half after my proposal to say yes and for me to get a contract for that very first one. Do your market research, go on the website of that publishing company if you're planning on working with a publishing company, and get the proposal guidelines. Most of them will have it on their website. Sometimes you have to ask them, but they'll have very specific guidelines for each publisher on exactly what they want to see in your proposal, and then follow that proposal and put it together the way they want it to be seen. And you're much more likely to have it be accepted because it's in a format that is pleasing for them, that gives them the information that they're going to need to present at the sales meetings and the planning meetings to see whether or not like, is this book the book that we're going to be working on next? So put out feelers. You could even just contact them and say like, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book. If you've by chance met anybody at a conference or something who works for the publishing companies, if you have a little bit of a personal that can be really helpful. And you can just say, hey, I'm thinking about this book. Is this something you'd be interested in? Just so they know it's coming, and then put that out there. Also, at the same time, it does seem like one of those aspects that publishing companies are looking for more is authors who have some sort of a platform and some sort of a presence out there on social media or website or newsletter or whatever. Maybe make sure that you're also working on that. And that was something that I think was not as much of a focus when I started out, but it's definitely more of a focus now that like Instagram exists and all of that. You submit your proposal, make sure that they got it. Sometimes proposals end up in spam filters. If you can contact them and just kind of double check, you could maybe email them or you can call them, give them a couple weeks or whatever first, but give them a few weeks, maybe even a month, or maybe right away, just say, hey, I just want to make sure you got it. And then if you haven't heard back, you can check back in another like 2 to 4 weeks, see what they have to say. If you don't hear back, a little while later, you may want to check in again. There's a lot on their plate. So not hearing back from them could mean that they're not interested, but it could also mean that in the hubbub of things, it just got passed to the back of the pile and that it's maybe not on their radar, but not necessarily on their no list. Once you're accepted, there's usually going to be a process of reviewing a contract. You can try to, if there are things, make sure to read through the contract. If you want to hire a lawyer or an agent to help you through your process, you can. I don't have that experience, so I can't talk too much about that, but all the things we talked about before. So kind of go back and forth on the contract. Some things may be adjustable, some things may not. If you don't like the contract, you can work with somebody else. You don't have to say yes. And then you go ahead and you write your manuscript, you submit it. It's often going to go through those rounds, and it releases. And, oftentimes there'll be some kind of an advance money processed throughout, and then royalties later, but it really varies widely depending upon the publishing company. Huge variations from publishing to company to publishing company. That's where chatting and putting out feelers, just kind of getting to know the different publishing companies can be really helpful.
Absolutely. I think that's always useful, being able to ask questions and connect with other people who have done it.
And, sometimes you're not going to get all, I'm a person who makes big lists of questions. I'm a journalist and I'm slightly OCD and I'm a Capricorn, and it's just sort of how I am. So it can be a little overwhelming, and not everybody's always going to have the time to answer them. That was one of the reasons why I ended up really wanting to, I initially wanted to work with Story because I knew that they produced beautiful books that reach people. But then when I did get in contact with the publisher after my submission, she actually said, yeah, I don't know if your book is quite the book we want to do. Here are some tips on how to make it better next time. So I didn't make like my title head snazzy enough and like really give a feel for the book. I just sort of was very like, it made it look like a textbook, and they didn't want to do a textbook. And I didn't envision it as a textbook, but I made my proposal look like a textbook. So that didn't quite work. But I really appreciated that she was willing to tell me, how to make my proposal better for other publishing companies. She gave me an idea on how they handle finances and advances and timelines and all that. And that was very generous in her very busy day to share that with me. And that really meant a lot. And as it's turned out, like everybody I've worked with and the team over there has been like really awesome people, and not just people I feel like I'm getting pushed through a machine with. And I have gotten that feeling. I've gotten a few requests from other publishing companies that just felt really slimy and pushy, and it just was not something that felt comfortable for me. So things you want to be thinking about and kind of get a general sense of, certainly before you sign a contract, is, does your book fit that publishing company style? Like, is it the kind of topic that they would print about? Do they fit you? Is that like a style of, what their catalog of books is? Is that a similar audience for what you want for your book? Because if it is, that could help catapult your book. If it's not, then it might be harder to reach your audience if that publishing company isn't connected with your audience. What is the royalties percent, and off of what amount? Is that off of the retail price, the wholesale price, how much the publishing company makes, which is usually closer to a wholesale? Could you possibly get more royalties? What about the advance amount, the advance schedule? Do you get free copies of your book? How many free copies of your book? Do you have the option to buy your book at wholesale to resell at retail? And what percentage off can you get based off of how many books you buy? If that's something, not everybody sells their own books. There are pros and cons to that. Oftentimes you will sell a little more if you sell your own, and you'll make a higher percent if you're buying at wholesale and reselling. How much will they support you in terms of editing, photography, illustration, design, distribution? How much are they providing as a service? The more they do, probably the smaller your percent will be, but hopefully the bigger your book's reach and distribution will be. But, there are a lot of like things to juggle there. How long will your book likely be in print? Some places keep things in print for a long time. Some people not, some places not. If you disagree on something, usually the publishing company will have that final say because they're taking it on under them. But it would be good to get a feel on how open are they to, I don't like this cover, or I really think this is important. And in some cases, you'll get what you want, and in some cases, you won't. But how much flexibility and control do you have as an author for that? And so some publishing companies really just kind of let the authors do and write whatever they want. And that can be really awesome, especially if what you want to do and write is not kind of as typical, and that you're concerned that you might get hemmed into being a book that you don't really want to be. And then other folks I know who work with publishing companies that had like almost no control at all. And so that's something to be aware of. How much polishing do you want versus how much control do you want? That's something to ask yourself, and then find out what's the vibe on that publishing company. How do they support that book after the release? For the most part, you are going to be your book's best marketer, but hopefully the publishing company will also help support you. Maybe they can get you into a conference. Maybe they can set you up for some radio interviews. Maybe they will, hopefully they're going to help distribute and promote your book to different booksellers? Do they help create marketing materials to promote the book? Some places will do those things, some people won't. Sometimes it's important, sometimes that's not. But those are good things to know. If you go on a book tour, will they cover your travel expenses? I was fortunate with the first book that I was able to do a variety of events that I couldn't get paid for, but I could get my travel expenses paid for. And then if I could sell my books versus somebody else selling my books, I would make that profit as well. I still certainly like overall lost money on the book tour versus, working at home on other things, but that was really helpful, made a lot of things more accessible, and it helped launch the book and also improved my own other aspects of business and just connecting with communities. But I will say that nowadays, with more electronic connections, there's a lot less of a budget for that kind of thing and more of the focus on giveaways, partnerships electronically, being on a podcast, being on a virtual conference, doing a radio show, like those kinds of things that don't really cost as much are going to be easier to set up, and publishing companies may not have a big expense for travel expenses. And some people work with agents, some people don't. Your agent will get a cut and you'll probably end up with a bigger upfront royalties, but I don't know that it's really necessary to have an agent, but it's out there. I think agents maybe are a little bit more important for the fiction world, which is a totally different publishing style than nonfiction. Self-publishing versus publishing with a publishing company, there are definitely pros and cons. And again, I think I've hinted to some of these things, but some of the big benefits to being self-published, and I know some very successful self-published folks. I interviewed somebody local who did a beautiful book with her mom called Recipes for Repair. And she was a photographer. Her mom was a food stylist, and it was for like Lyme and inflammation friendly recipes. And so I chatted with her. Krista Sinadinos has a really amazing book that she self-published. And, a lot of our elder herbalists have really great, small press or self-published books that are out there. And so some of the pros would be that you generally have total control over what you want your book. You don't have to wait for all like these approvals, and are you going to let me do the book the way I want? And I want to, for Krista, she wanted her book to be huge, and she knew that almost any publishing company was going to be like, oh, shorten that to like way less of its size. And that was something that was really important for her, that she could fit a lot of really in-depth information into her book. And so that was one of the reasons why she chose to self-publish. You also are going to be doing a lot of the it's all either all you doing it, or you're going to be hiring for it or paying for it or whatever to get that editing, the design, the publishing, the printing. One of my peeves as somebody who likes aesthetics of things on some self-published books, not the ones I just mentioned, but other ones, is that sometimes a self-published book ends up looking kind of like rough and choppy and like a self-published book. And there are, the font is too big, the design is really poor, there are glaring like typos all over the place, the writing isn't very good. If those things are important to you, I know they were very important to me, that make sure that you do your self-published well, and it will feel like more of a real book when somebody gets it in their hands, and they'll be more apt to recommend it to other people. And so if you're not capable of doing that, then considering hiring other folks to help you do that, which means a lot more money out of your pocket initially to get that to happen. You do make a lot more money per book, like hugely more money per book. Even if you print the books, the percentage of the book that is your money is a lot more versus if you're working with a publisher, which will be a tiny fraction. But you're completely reliant upon your platform to get it out there. So you don't have the extra benefit of a little bit bigger of an audience. The distribution, especially to other booksellers, tends to be really, really poor. That said, I will say with Amazon and other electronic book places and the ability to print on demand, that does increase the accessibility of self-published books and reduces a lot of the upfront costs, but you're still relatively dependent upon your own platform to support the book and your own skills, or the skills that you can hire in to make sure that your book is well done so that people will like it when they get it. And with a publisher, you're going to usually get more polishing and editing, although that will really vary by the publishing company. The price per book might be less expensive depending upon the publishing company. So that might be a boon to your readers and also to your overall sales. you might have more numbers of books sold. You might have a greater platform reach. So like, can you get a Kindle deal? Your percentages of income will be very small on that, but it might get your book out into more hands. Is it getting out to libraries? That might get your book out into more hands. And then once people see your book in a library, they may fall in love with it and decide to buy it. Those may be things that would be trickier to broker on your own. Those are all different things to consider there. And then I think we're wrapping up here to the last few things. So once you've kind of got your book done, you've got your book, figured out how you're going to write it, all the basics, you've written it, you also want to be able to launch it. So just a few quick ideas that like, it's done, but is it really? Because just writing the book alone does not make for a book that actually reaches people. And so usually after your manuscript, there will be those rounds of editing, as I mentioned. And even if you have a publishing company, and even if that publishing company is pretty awesome, you will be so much more successful in the launch of your book if you are also an active participant, and your publishing company will be happy about that too. But also like for you and your reach of the book, and also for the ability of publishing a book to support other aspects of your business, really supporting that. So pre-release, that could be building buzz, having your newsletter list, letting your newsletter list know that a book is coming, building partnerships with colleagues and other, outlets and organizations and conferences and that kind of thing. Maybe you're applying to speak at different conferences to talk about some of the topics that are in the book, or you're thinking about becoming a vendor at a conference so that you can sell your book. I will say that if you are able to get a speaking gig and vend your book at the same time, that often is really helpful. Taking or encouraging book orders, pre-orders, that will really help drive the launch of the book, whether you're doing those pre-orders and managing them and signing the books and shipping them, or you've created some sort of a platform where people could pre-order it elsewhere and then maybe get bonus goodies for having pre-ordered the book. And so maybe that might be like a little online class or some little ebook bonus materials or discounts to places that you've partnered with or whatever that may be. I haven't done it. I've just done it on my own website, and I've done my own pre-sales. But I know a lot of folks who end up really kind of encouraging the pre-sales through any place, which is a huge benefit to that in terms of reach of the book and sales of the book. Entreport is one of the programs that folks will use to create those websites where you can say I've got my proof that I bought the book, and then I get all the little bonuses of what I get. You could also be sending review copies or asking your publishing company. Hopefully your publishing company will be sending review copies out to people. So these are free copies, whether electronic or in print, that are going out to folks who might consider supporting your book. So it could be people who are going to review your book for some kind of an outlet. It could be influencers. It could be like for me, for Body Into Balance, I was like, hey, I wonder if other herb schools who teach this way would be up for a book that would support that. And so I reached out to other herb schools and said, hey, I have this book coming out. You might like it. Can I have the publishing company send you a free copy? And so that went out to them. So it could be a print copy or it could be electronic copy or both. The electric copies might be available before the book is totally finalized. And the print copies, of course, cost a lot more to send to people. And you have to wait until the book is actually released or very close to release. But it is nice. People do sometimes like getting the real book in their hands. Getting endorsements, that usually happens a little earlier in the process, but it can happen at any point in the process where, again, those review copies, maybe electronic, are going out into the community to say or a sample might go out to the community to say, hey, would you consider reviewing my book? And then we can put a little bit that you say on the cover or the inside of the book or the back cover or something like that, and getting endorsements of people who really fit your book and the vibe really well can really be very helpful, and is just a huge honor when folks are willing to do that. You certainly want to have some kind of a website, a web page, or a social media page for yourself and or your book to really be putting that book out there in the world. Once it releases, you're going to probably want to be signing books some way to get them in people's hands, selling books, or encouraging the sales of elsewhere. One of the perks of selling it yourself is that you do make a higher percent, because not only do you get your royalties, or maybe you get your royalties depending upon your contract, for your own resales, but you'll also get like that profit of getting wholesale and then reselling at retail. You do have to like pay shipping those. So that can be whether you pay it or whether you pass that on to your customer, that can be a downside to reselling. One of the perks of not selling books yourself directly is that you can funnel those sales more towards the online sellers like indie books and Amazon and local bookstores and all of that. And so that will make them happier. But also as those sales increase, it might boost your book higher up in the bestseller lists, and then they promote it more. You'll see it as like, oh, you wanted this book? What about this book? And so that can be really nice. Maybe there are Kindle deals that at some, maybe not initially, but later on after the book comes out a little while, maybe you can get on some ebook discounts so that it's discounted or even free. And that might raise your reach and your accessibility, as well as your sales and your bestseller kind of level. You might have some videos or excerpts of the book that you put out there to the general public to give them a feel for what you're offering and create some interest in people wanting to learn more about the topics. And then you can market through the conferences, all the things I mentioned already, podcasts, reprints, going out to different, blogs or websites or magazines. There aren't too many magazines still around in print, but those can be nice. Doing giveaways, and especially joint giveaways, can be really, really helpful. If you can, whether it's your publisher or you going on some kind of a quote unquote book tour to promote your book, and other ways to partner your book with other aspects of your business, whatever that may be. So we're wrapping things up.
Yes, my brain has been going, getting some ideas. I really hope that because of this talk, there will be some people who listen and think, yes, I am going to go and write the outline and get the wheels moving on the project. But I would love to know your top 3 tips for an herbalist who wants to publish a book.
So one is, write a book that's special. Special can mean a lot of different things, but write a book that really serves your readers and does something that other books don't do, and that is clear and organized and just really like of value. 2 would be that making sure to set aside those chunks of time. It's really easy for life is so crazy busy for everybody. We all have so many different things that we're juggling in business and in life, and trying to fit a book in with that is not an easy thing. So trying to create like a conscious effort to set aside a chunk of time or multiple chunks of time to specifically work on writing the book can be really helpful to make that happen. And, maybe you are scheduling some breaks in there or doing that in a beautiful place so that you don't get completely burnt out by the process. And so you can keep your creative juices going. Maybe for me with the last book, I was making a lot of like nice, beautiful beverages of tea or seltzer to drink while I was writing my book using aromatherapy. One of my favorite recipes was seltzer with some lemon balm tincture and then a wedge of fresh lemon that just kept me like calm and focused as I was trying to meet a very difficult deadline. Just all those different things to keep your goals in view and to actually write the book itself. So having kind of that to-do list, and in the background of when you're doing everything else, be kind of working towards things in the book, but then also having that specific time to write it. And then being very proactive in all the stages. It's not just like, oh, I put this, I contact somebody and they do everything for me, or I write the book and then it's out in the world and I don't need to do anything else. Like really being very active in all of that, like the initial stages of gathering feedback and that research and development as you craft what that book might be and actually write it, communicating with your publishers. You don't want to be a bother to them because they're busy, but one of my colleagues who's writing a book right now is still kind of wrapping her head around exactly like what's the voice that she wants to use in the book that's accessible to everyday people, but also delivers some of the science she wants to deliver. And so she arranged to send like a sample chapter to the editor so that they could just get a vibe and give some feedback before she went and wrote the whole book to make sure that she was on the right track. Or, I might go back and forth with the editor to be like, all right, like, I just want to make sure I understand like your vision and my vision. So I make sure that I'm moving in the right direction. And then communicating with your potential audience and getting, creating that buzz and getting it out. Like it's more than just writing the book when it comes to having a book. And so just keeping that in mind, that those will be the things that help your book not only be successful for you, but also make it more helpful for the community and more of a service for the community and actually reach the community that would benefit from your book.
Yeah, wonderful. I think they're great tips just to bring it all together. And I can definitely relate to that, needing to set aside time and just focusing on the book, as far as we're all just busy and needing to actually really focus on something. It's probably the only way really to create a good book, because otherwise it's going to be scattered. It's not going to have that direction and purpose in it as well. We need to have that that time and space to put into it to really make it as good as it can be. So thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us. I would love it if you could let everyone know about like how they can find out more about you, Wintergreen Botanicals, and your new book coming out. Would you like to let us know where people should go from here?
Well, my website is always a great place for people to go, which is this wintergreenbotanicals.com is my website. I'm also very Googleable, New Hampshire Maria Herbalist. You'll find me. But you can certainly pre-order my new book, Herbal Remedies for Sleep, which will be releasing very, very soon, as well as order other books by me. That's just for the United States. There will certainly be bonus goodies. And so if you're in another country, you can just send me a receipt of the book and I will give you access to those bonus goodies. But if you want them in the United States, usually you need to order the book through me in order to get those. But you could also pre-order it through other ways as well, and you might get a better price because I can't compete with some of the other sources in pricing. And but you will support the work of the authors vastly better if you are purchasing directly through them. So, but however the books get in your hand is good by me. And then you can also, I do a lot of teaching of introductory, intermediate, and advanced herbal study programs. And everything is basically also online, pre-recorded and or live stream. And I also do some amount of classes in person simultaneously. And so I am offering a store-wide, if you will, for all of my online classes and series of 10% off with the code Herbal Entrepreneur 2024. You can get on my mailing list, which is on my website and also available through social media to just keep abreast on what's coming up. I send about one email a month and always include various useful tidbits about herbalism and seasonal musings, as well as what I'm up to that month. And if you're on social media, you can go to Maria Noel Groves on Instagram or Wintergreen Botanicals on Facebook and follow me in those places. And then if you're going to be at the Tuscany event through Herbal Entrepreneur, we will be in person. It's so exciting, very soon. And I will be there teaching. And so I'm super excited to meet many of you in person at that event. And so honored, Yolanda, to be part of that event.
I'm so excited about that event and having the opportunity to spend a week with you, Rosemary Gladster, Margie Flint, and Aletakunda Avasi. It's going to be amazing. I am truly looking forward to that. I'm honored that you're able to be involved in both of those events this year. So thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you've shared today. It has been wonderful as always. And yeah, thank you once again.
And thank you. You always put together such great Herbal Entrepreneur conferences. So I'm so honored to be part of it, but also thank you for putting them together because you bring together so many amazing herbalists and topics. And I know I always find some of the other classes like super useful for myself. And I love that it is, free and accessible to the international world, which is just such an amazing gift to the community. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to everybody else who's part of this conference for being part of it. So perhaps we'll see you next year or in next month in Tuscany.